afternoon, everyone, and thank you once again for joining ARC's weekly fireside chat. So today we will be discussing we'll be hearing from our amazing policy teams, and we will be actually unveiling our state policy agenda for this coming legislative cycle. The work continues as always at ARC until we have a truly equitable system. We will not stop, and we will continue to push forward equitable policies that make our criminal justice system more fair. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our amazing guests, as we always have some really amazing human beings. This is our policy team for our state and some local work that we'll be sharing with you. So Esteban Nuñez, who's our ARC Director of Advocacy, Celina Chapin, who is our ARC Public Policy Associate, Josh Pynoos, who's our ARC Policy Associate, Miguel Garcia, our ARC Advocacy Coordinator up in Sacramento, and Ronnie Villeda, our ARC Advocacy and Community Organizer here in Los Angeles. Without further ado, again, as I say, I'd like to introduce or allow Esteban to introduce himself. Esteban, how are you doing today? And tell us a little bit about your work and what you've been up to of late.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I'm doing well, and gladly accompanied by the policy team. We all have done extraordinary work, and I would not be able to work on the things that I've been able to work on without the team next to me. So I'm really glad to introduce you all to them, and then of course to talk about the state policies that we have in the coming year. So yeah, I do want to say that we did conduct a survey in early November, surveying all of our members, really just to try to get a better grasp of the hardships that they currently face. Because pre-COVID, the hardships were very different than they are now, right? I mean, getting an ID prior to COVID was hard, but it was hard to navigate the outside world. And now with COVID, if you don't have a piece of identification, it's nearly impossible. So really just trying to understand in depth what our members face, the barriers that they face, but also just the policies that they want to see come through. What would bring people hope, inside, what would bring people hope on the outside, what's going to help people strive towards greatness, because we all know that there's endless potential within our membership and within the formerly incarcerated community. It's just a matter of honing that and ensuring that those opportunities are available. So we're just here to make sure that we expand on them.
Hey, thank you, Esteban. Greatly appreciate that. Celina, could you introduce yourself? How are you doing today, and tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Hi, everyone. I am Celina. I'm on the policy team here in Los Angeles. I've been with ARC for 3 or 4 years now, mostly focusing on state legislation. This year, focusing on housing and gang enhancements, as well as helping out the team with their priorities.
Thank you, Celina. Josh, please introduce yourself and how are you doing today, and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Good afternoon, Sam. It's great to be on with you, and great to be on with the rest of my amazing team. I work on various different policy campaigns in the state of California, and also support our communications team with helping to tell our members stories. So they both go hand in hand.
Absolutely, the story is where the power is at. The story of our people, our community. Miguel, how are you doing today? Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Hey Sam, I'm doing good. I'm getting excited for WandaVision today. A little bit of the work that I do revolves around primarily juvenile justice work in the state of California. I am formerly incarcerated within the Department of Juvenile Justice, and that's where I have a strong passion on holding our juvenile justice system accountable and providing the best opportunities for those that enter and preventing those youth from entering it.
Thank you so much, Miguel. Ronnie, could you introduce yourself? How are you doing today, and tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Hello, Sam. Thank you. My name is Ronaldo Villeda. I'm the Advocacy and Community Organizer at the LA office. I'm a formerly incarcerated young man. I did 4 years in Orange County Juvenile Hall. The work that I do today pertains to county level initiatives around juvenile justice reform. More importantly, I have areas of emphasis are the Board of Supervisors and the JJCC, but also just creating space for youth voices and youth leaders to be able to share their lived experience and advocate alongside with me.
Hey, thank you, Ronnie. I just want to shout out, hey, Shonique, hey, Michael Griggs, longtime member. Kent Mendoza, who couldn't be here with us today, is also part of the policy team. Just want to shout you out. I see you there in the chat. So for our audience, as CORE, ARC exists to change the hearts and minds of policymakers, those with political power and the general public, so that our system is more equitable for all, for everyone. To start this year off, we conducted a survey that Esteban talked about of our membership, and our membership consists of formerly incarcerated people. We also do in-reach into the facilities for people to be able to hear the voices of people that are currently incarcerated and find out the issues that are most important to them, both formerly and currently incarcerated people, because our mission is to empower formerly and currently incarcerated people. So here's some of the results of that survey. The slide will come up on the screen. Could you, if you can, could you enlarge that a little bit? So ARC member results were California ID. 68% of ARC members were released without a government form of identification. And another very important part to consider about IDs is when you register or when you actually get an ID in the state of California, you're automatically registered to vote. Last year, we passed Prop 17 in conjunction with a number of other organizations that do criminal justice reform work. And one of the things that we have to think about always is implementation. And so when a person walks out of California State Prison, if they have an ID, they're a registered voter, and that's our voice, that's our power. The second part, youth justice. 83.9% of our members were first introduced to the criminal justice system before the age of 25. The third was housing. 52.87% of our members have experienced homelessness. 32.65% of our members have had their housing application delayed or denied due to past conviction. That's not equitable at all. Extreme sentencing. 54.6% of our membership were sentenced to life with or without the possibility of parole. 48% were sentenced to life, and 6% were sentenced to LWOP. Sunset convictions, 86% have never had their record expunged. I fall in a number of those categories. And so just to be clear, this came from both our members and from people inside. And so again, empowering currently and formerly incarcerated people is part of our mission. Esteban, why was this survey, why was this important? I mean, were there any surprises in the results that you received from the survey?
So the survey is important just because it's important for us, from ARC's perspective, that our members really are the driving force behind our policy priorities. An example is parole is very different now than it was when I was on parole. And we want to effectively capture and ensure that we are promoting equity and we are striving towards a systems change that is in the best interest of our members. And so that's really what the goal behind this was. I would say the most interesting statistic that I found come out of this was that 30% of our members are both in school and working. And 87.5% of our members have a full-time job. 43.75% of them are full-time students. And 30% of them are doing both. And I think that just speaks to just how tenacious ARC members are and the quality of care that we provide and support in helping connect them to services and helping them connect them to education and also just real career pathways and not, temporary work.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Esteban. Josh, how do we ensure our returning community members, how do we ensure that they start out on their best possible foot when being released?
So everyone at home probably has some form of ID and takes it everywhere with them, but a lot of people who are released from prison don't even get that dignity. So we're working on a bill that will expand the Cal ID. There's a small Cal ID program in CDCR, but right now it leaves out people who are serving life or long sentences. So we are working on a bill with a great coalition and with Assembly Member Mark Stone to expand that program so that so that everyone who will be released can come home with an ID and not not be let out without any form of identification.
Josh, could you share with us a few or a couple of barriers that people might run into without an ID?
Sure. So gate money, you get $200 of gate money, and that can go fast. And without an ID, you can't get connected to public benefit services like CalFresh, or even get healthcare, or apply for a job, or get housing. And also, a lot of our members don't have their birth certificates or social security cards, and you can't. In order to get an ID, you have to have that. So the bill will also help people who are inside now obtain those documents so they can get an ID and get home and start to thrive in our communities and be valued community members with an ID that says you're a resident of California, you have an address, you have a name.
Right. Absolutely. For instance, I know of people who might have to go to a place like Nick's check cashing, and they charge you like 15% of your check. And so there's some really, really major issues that you run into if you don't have if you don't have state ID. Shonique asked a question. Just want to touch this and just get it out very quick. In terms of support letters, Shonique, I'm actually in charge of it, or Oscar Bonella, who's the inside coordinator. So if you just call the office, or whoever the loved one is that's currently incarcerated that needs a support letter, if they write to the office and ask for a support letter, we'll send all of the requirements necessary to get that letter directly to them. Miguel, in the realm of juvenile justice, can you tell us about Senate Bill 493?
Yes. So Senate Bill 493, the Promise Act, which stands for Promoting Youth Success and Empowerment, is going to do a lot of things. It's going to overhaul a long-lasting juvenile grant state fund that has been in place since 2000. It was introduced by now Congressman Cardenas and Congressman Adam Smith. And so what this bill will essentially go ahead and do is fix the failures that have been occurring for the last 20 years. A state audit report had found that out of the 5 counties that were selected in this audit, that some did not even have a juvenile justice coordinating council, or did not have any indication that a coordinating council will exist. Reforming the Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act's response to rising calls for racial justice and addresses economic challenges heightened by COVID-19. This bill will provide for greater accountability and effectiveness and equality in supporting youth. And that's one of the things. And particularly, SB 493 will do this by requiring at least 95% of JJCPA funds to be invested in non-law enforcement public agencies or community-based organizations. Further, it will foster equitable decision-making by restructuring each county's juvenile justice coordinating council, which is responsible for overseeing the JJCPA grant administration locally. Under SB 493, the JJCCs will have fewer mandated government agencies, representatives, and must include at least 50% community representation. This bill will also expand in reporting by the Board and State Community Corrections, BSCC, and counties to include critical evidence on youth served programs' effectiveness to ensure that our taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. Again, in a report in a state audit report last year highlighted that counties spent on average 75% of these funds on salaries and benefits for probation departments. If we see the time in which this bill was enacted in 2000, this grant fund was enacted in 2000, juvenile incarceration or detention has decreased by 80%. And in 2018 and 19, counties received nearly almost 160 million of Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act funding. Again, this is a big pot of money that has had some lack of accountability, no real diverse community population to discuss how the money is funded. So it's going to do a lot of things by holding accountability, making sure that money is going into the community and helping restore some transparency in our decision making at the local level.
Definitely an important piece of legislation that we need to be aware of. And just again, so our listeners understand, our policy is informed by our members who are formerly incarcerated and by people that are currently incarcerated. That's how we make our decisions. That's how we create our policy. That's what we push forward, as that's what this organization has always been and will continue to be about. Ronnie, why is it important to ensure oversight and accountability on local levels or local jurisdictions? And can you tell us about the Peace Act, please?
Yes, so AB 89, or the Peace Officer Education and Age Conditions for Employment Act, is a bill that we're sponsoring. Basically what the bill is going to do is it's going to raise the minimum age from 18 to 25 for all peace officers, or they need to have an equivalent of a bachelor's degree completed. So some of the data that was collected for the bill shows that high rate officers who use excessive force tend to be of a younger age. The bill also uses neuroscience. Some of the neuroscience that we also use for like juvenile justice reform bills that emphasize the development of the prefrontal cortex. And that is very key when making decisions, when you go in fight or flight mode. It's the deciding factor whether or not you're going to act on impulse or not. 4 states require that you have a bachelor's degree. I think it's like Illinois, Nevada, and a couple other states. But I think a key statistic that stood out to me was that 70% of all disciplinary actions that were taken were to officers with no more than a high school diploma. So education is very important when it comes to those who oversee our youth and those who are in corrections as well. But yeah, the Peace Act, it would require those 2 things, must be 25 and require a bachelor's degree as well.
I think that's a great piece of legislation. If you think about it, I would like to have police officers that are a bit more mature or older, because the brain science, one of the things that we've pushed on our, as you mentioned, Ronnie, on our criminal justice reform is like the frontal lobe just is not fully developed. And that's where both impulsiveness and emotions are like literally when you're young. And if all of us want to be honest, I'll be the first to be honest, fast approaching my 50s, not. When I was 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, I responded and acted in an entirely different way than once I was in my 30s. And as I get older, I'm even a bit more conscious of how I respond and speak to people. Celina, ARC has 2 housing sites for our returning community members. But what are we doing in the realm of policy making to make sure that there's reliable housing for people who have conviction histories? And what proposed legislation provides tenants with the option to find relief should they be denied housing because of those convictions?
Yeah, so as you know, housing is one of the most commonly voiced reentry obstacles for our membership. As you mentioned in the survey that we conducted, over half of ARC members have reported to experience homelessness, which is staggering. And especially now during COVID, there are so many people who are coming home to limited capacity reentry resources. And so it's really important to us right now. And to make this even more difficult, some counties in California practice crime-free housing, which is where law enforcement encourages and collaborates with landlords to discriminate against people with prior convictions. It's such a housing is such a foundational need. It's hard to think about employment or education or anything, when you don't have a roof over your head. So with that in mind, this year and in the years to come, we are prioritizing making housing more accessible to people with prior convictions. This year, we are hoping to introduce legislation that is authored by Assemblymember Reggie Jones-Sawyer. It doesn't have a number yet, but it would disallow landlords to ask for someone's criminal background or run a background check at the first stage of the application process. It halts the practice of crime-free housing, and it provides prospective tenants with options to appeal if they are denied based on their background, and opportunities for recourse if landlords don't comply with these limitations. So in doing so, we hope to change this narrative that has deprived so many people of this foundational need. And we hope to promote family reunification and mitigate homelessness in our communities. This bill is just a first step. We are obviously over the next years hoping to expand to make housing even more accessible.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Celina. And there's huge overlap when we look at our homelessness or houselessness population, especially here in Los Angeles. There, when it comes to criminal convictions, like we're still being punished for things that we paid the price for by being incarcerated. Because I have a conviction that's 20 or 30 years old now, I can't live in a certain place. And then the discrimination, like it's outrageous to take a person and say, you know what, for the rest of your life, we're going to judge you based on this conviction. So I'm glad that we're approaching this. And as Celina said, this is just our first step when it comes to houselessness. We will continue to push and work towards making sure that a conviction does not stop a person from being able to have a roof over their head and a foundation for them to build on. Literally, how can I go to work and focus on work if I don't have anywhere to live? Esteban, how is the U.S. unique in sentencing practices? It's a couple of parts question to us, so follow me on this. How is the U.S. unique in sentencing practices? How do we bring relief to people who have been given incredibly long sentences but have rehabilitated themselves?
Yeah, so the United States, of course, has the highest incarceration rates in the world. And though, while some countries may commit more people to jail or prison a year, we by far keep more people long into as they age into old age or death. And you brought up the statistic about how many ARC members were sentenced to life or life without the possibility of parole. I also want to say of our survey, of our survey respondents, 63% of them served over 10 years in prison, and 36.7% of them served over 20 years in prison. And I say that just because we have been looking at second chances. How does everybody have an opportunity to come home? And so we're working with Senator Durazo on SB 481 to identify what exactly it would look like, but ensuring that people do have a chance to go in front of, whether a board of parole hearing and advocate on behalf of themselves in the rehabilitation process. Because everybody deserves a second chance, and we strongly believe it. And majority of our members are former lifers and have been extremely successful in their lives since coming home. I mean, Sam, you're a prime example of that, and you can speak to just what you've seen, in Norway, and how with the differences in culture and how you treat people and how you rehabilitate people and how we do it, right? And it's just drastically different. So we want to get to a place where we are treating people with humanity, with the dignity that they deserve, but also allowing them a chance to strive towards something, towards a second chance. And if that's a board of parole hearing, then there's a board of parole hearing. I mean, the commission, of course, of a board parole hearing, it's extremely hard to get through. It's extremely hard to be found suitable. But they do have a 2.3 recidivism rate, and that is drastically lower than any other population that is being released from CDCR. So I do think that we have a lot of work to do in this realm. Of course, a lot of stigma to break through, but we are working towards ensuring that everybody has a second chance at coming home.
Absolutely, thank you for that, Esteban. And personally, I went to the board 9 times. 9 times. The 8th time I went to the board and was denied. A court ordered me back for the 9th hearing, saying that there was no evidence that demonstrated that I was a current threat to public safety. I returned home 9 years ago, but had not the court stepped in, I might quite well still be inside an institution being called, and these are not my words, but this is what they call a violent offender, a threat to public safety, when my track record for 9 years clearly demonstrates otherwise. I'm not unique, I'm not a unicorn. There are thousands of others that just need the opportunity to come home and to give back to their communities. At this point in time, too, for all of our members, all of our ARC members that are listening and watching this is our call to action to reach out to Esteban, to Nick in Communications for storytelling. any of these policies that we're working on, please reach out, get involved. We want more and more stories to really elevate all of these pieces, especially this next piece, which is also this next piece that we're going to talk about, which also directly affect me. Now, Celina, what are we doing in the area of reforming gang enhancements?
Yeah, this year we are introducing AB 333, authored by Assemblymember Kamlager, which would limit the application of gang enhancements. For those who are unfamiliar, gang enhancements are racist, frankly, and they have had a negative impact on many ARC members. 92% of the people who receive gang enhancements are people of color. A gang enhancement adds years to whatever sentence someone receives for an offense. In some circumstances, a gang enhancement can lead to a life sentence where it would not otherwise. And so it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem for us. It's a huge problem for our membership. It can be applied very broadly. The definitions around it are kind of muddy and convoluted. And so it allows for really broad discretion and abuse, honestly. Right now, pretty much a law enforcement officer can just say, oh, I think that this person is in a gang, and then that person can get a gang enhancement. And it can be just because they are from the same neighborhood as someone who's in a gang, or they're with their friends who have the same color skin as them, or, they know people who are in a gang. So it's really problematic. The bill that we are working on right now ends the ability of prosecutors to claim that people are in a gang simply because they may come from the same community or be related or know someone. It reduces the list of crimes that allow for gang enhancements to be charged. It prohibits the use of current charge as a proof of a pattern of criminal gang activity. It requires direct evidence of current and active gang allegations, and much more. Again, this is another one that is a first step. We've been hearing about gang enhancements for so long, and we've been trying to tackle it for so long. And so this is hopefully shifting the needle to not only limiting gang enhancements, but hopefully one day eliminating them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Celina, for that. And again, I want to echo what Celina said. This is just our first step. We will be consistently and constantly working on changing all of these pieces of legislation. And I always reflect back to what we did with our first youthful offender parole bill. It started out where it was just for people that were under 18. And people said that didn't go far enough, and we agreed, but we also knew that it was just the first step. And then we pushed it to people that were up to 23. And people said that's not enough, and we agreed. And then AB 1308 came around, and now it's for people that are up to 26. And so understanding that we have to start somewhere, this is not complete. It's our first step, and we'll continue to push and push and push until our system is equitable. Not somewhat equitable, not almost equitable, but until we have an equitable system that treats all people, regardless of their race, their gender, their social economic background, regardless of that. Just that you're a human being, you get treated the same way every other human being is treated, with dignity, respect, and a sentence that's equitable. And with that, I want to ask Celina, so you explained to us already how the requirements change. Right now, any law enforcement officer can basically be sworn in and said that they're a gang expert, and then that person can basically say, you know what, Josh, you grew up on 3rd Avenue 48, therefore you're a member of the Rolling 60 Crips, or the Badass gang, or whatever gang that's in that area. That changes now, right? Or that will change once we push this piece of legislation through.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Rookie mistake. But yeah, it does. It makes the requirements much stricter. So.
All right. Thank you for that again, Celina. Esteban, what is the work that ARC is doing in terms of sunsetting convictions? And could you, who else is in that coalition? But explain what is a sunset conviction? Could you share with us? And what are we doing in that area? Who's in that coalition?
So I'll say, I mean, it's a pretty expansive coalition. As it stands right now, the co-sponsors we're working really closely with CSJ, Homeboys, LARP, and LSPC. Senator Durazo is authoring this. It's SB 731. And really what this looks at is tackling licensing. It looks to tackle licensing barriers. I mean, licensing barriers have been problematic for a long time. I mean, EMT most notably for our members, it's been an issue, and a lot of licensing in or agencies in California usually have blanket bans against people with past criminal convictions, or have some sort of insight to that person's record because of the expungement laws that currently are in place. So what SB 731 does is it provides what is a record sealing, a full record sealing, but in a two-part process. The first part being when somebody discharges their supervision, so whether that's parole or probation or a federal form of supervision, you would have a partial record sealing. And a partial record sealing would mean that your record is still available to law enforcement agencies or anybody who has a live hand, but you obviously have a leg up in terms of trying to get some sort of license. And then the final sealing comes 2 years after you've discharged your supervision, and then that's a full record sealing, much like what you would see under an expungement of 2147, where these agencies would not have access to your expungement or your past criminal record. And so the hope is that, it's wiping the slate clean 2 years after you discharged your supervision and really getting being able to start anew.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Esteban. So there's also a movement, and I'm gonna jump back to you in a minute, Esteban, to kind of update us on some things that happened in Utah and Colorado. But first, I want to ask Josh, can you tell us a little bit about ACA 3, the California Abolition Act?
Sure. So that stands for Assembly Constitutional Amendment. And then what that will do is remove involuntary servitude from our state constitution. Many people know that the 13th Amendment prohibits slavery except for a crime, but that also, even though California wasn't a slave state, it's still embedded into our state constitution. And we know that many of our members when they were incarcerated, were forced to work, even though that it's not a part of sentencing, is that you're not sentenced to labor, or it's not sentenced that you have to have this specific job, but they're sort of forced against their will to labor for the state, making license plates, flags, road signs, and all these things. And we know that it really dehumanizes their value to do that and to be under our state constitution where we're sort of permitting involuntary servitude.
So let me ask you this on a broader look. So we removed this from the California Constitution. In prison, for instance, I remember having a porter job, and I was paid the whopping amount of 12 cents an hour. I was mega rich. How does removing this from our state constitution help our incarcerated community be treated more fairly?
Because they'll no longer it's sort of removing sort of the legacy of slavery. And then this is a little bit different because this will have to be turned into sort of a ballot initiative like Prop 17. So in 2020, the California voters will get to decide on this. So I'm certain people, just so people fully understand, I want to jump to Esteban with a question that you just brought up, Josh. Thank you for that, Josh. Can you explain to us the difference between a ballot initiative and a referendum? Because there was some confusion last year, and but this is more information on anything. So for instance, ACA 3 is Assembly Bill California amendment, or California Constitution amendment, and that requires. Could you break that down? Like, explain to me like I'm a 4-year-old.
So there's two ways essentially to get something on the ballot. You can gather signatures, and you have to get a high percentage of the amount of voters that voted in the last gubernatorial election, or you can get to a supermajority in the legislature. And we did it with ACA 6, also known as Prop 17, where it requires a 2/3 vote in both houses, and then it goes on to the ballot the following election year. And this will happen exactly like that. So it will require 2/3 vote in both houses, Senate and Assembly, and then go into the voters 2021 or 2022. But a referendum is essentially the voters taking action to undo a legislative effort. So if, as an example, if we were to pass the ID bill, but voters felt like everybody leaving an institution shouldn't have an ID, they could gather signatures and repeal essentially the legislature's decision, and that's what a referendum is.
Okay, so that's more for our audience, so you can really understand when we talk about a statewide initiative and a referendum. They're essentially two different things. And want to just read it's on our screen. Shonique Williams asks, too often great legislation is successfully passed by CBOs such as ARC, yet manipulated by those in opposition to underserve those intended. What can the community do to protect the execution of these bills we vote for? Great question, Shonique. First, I'll say this. I know when it comes to implementation and making sure that our bills are not manipulated, we continuously track and follow up and make sure that they're implemented. Every piece of legislation that ARC has been involved with, even the first piece of legislation, we make sure that we're aware of what's going on with it. And if there's some way or someone or a group of someone that are trying to manipulate it in a way that it's not intended to be, we push back and we organize our members to push forward. Esteban, can you share with us, or Celina, or anyone on the panel, can you share with us how can our communities make sure that they're engaged to make sure that this is not done with legislation that we pass?
One thing I'll say is like 2147 is kind of a prime example, or most recent example, I'll say, and then I'll let somebody speak to 1391. But 2147 with the expungements, there was a lot of just uncertainty around, if institutional firefighters were included. There was a lot of uncertainty around the blanket bans that EMSA currently still has in their regulations. And what we've done is really just engage the governor's office, engage a lot of the EMSA, engage judicial council, and really it's been because of our follow-up work. 2 members, ARC members, Ventura Training Camp facility members, have been expunged currently, and their CDCR has agreed to work with VTC and those making inquiries about being expunged under 2147. So I think it just comes to ensuring that the organizations are just doing the follow-up work and monitoring implementation, but also bringing those directly impacted into those conversations. So I've had the pleasure to bring some of these VTC members into these conversations with these licensing boards, and then also with CDCR, and that's been incredibly helpful because nobody can speak to it better than they can. So. Absolutely.
Would anybody else on the panel like to weigh in on making sure that our bills are implemented properly and not manipulated by others who would like to actually see them used in a way that they were not intended?
I think if somebody could talk, Miguel could. Yeah, Miguel.
I think just for individuals who have direct lived experience, our testimonies and our journey to where we're at today or where we're going is important. There is a narrative out there that depicts us as non-rehabilitative or threats to society, as Sam mentioned. Those words are thrown around still in these spaces, but it's our duty, I think, as those who have gone through these traumatic experiences, to rise above that and redefine ourselves as being something more. And I think that's what the legislation that we have proposed allows that. So I'm really excited, and we have a great team, and we're very fortunate to have a membership that is committed to having their voice heard, especially for those that don't have a voice.
Thank you, Miguel. I want to circle back and just share something with our audience about ACA 3, our Constitution, the California Abolition Act, to end involuntary servitude. This literally, in many states, is a remnant left over from slavery. Like, that's what it is. If you think about it, if you really know history, and I'm a history buff, the Emancipation Proclamation, which was passed in 1865, freed enslaved people. There's a lot of language issues that I have, because first they say they freed slaves. no one is a slave. There were enslaved people. African Americans were enslaved. They were not slaves. They were enslaved. And so in 1865, they were freed. And then 6 months later, the 13th Amendment was passed, which said that slavery is hereby abolished, except if you're duly convicted of a crime, basically. So in other words, I can arrest you and enslave you and make you pick cotton forcibly. That's in our federal constitution, and every state also has this piece of this remnant of slavery. And so immediately following the passage of the 13th Amendment, black codes were enacted. Take time and please read about this. Black codes basically said, if you were black, you had to work for someone white. Even if you were already freed and you had your own booming business, you still had to work for someone white, or else you were considered to be loitering and you could be arrested. And so sharecropping and all of these other things came from this. And so as we move forward as a country, as a nation, as a state, these remnants need to be eliminated. They can be in a book, in a book, in a library, or in a museum, but they should not be a part of how we live today. They should not be a part of what our society is. And so when we look at this piece of legislation that's coming forward, for me, it's really deeply personal because I know very well my lineage. And I know what my great-great-grandfather went through, and I know what my great-great-grandmother went through. And if you can just imagine it, yes, we're removed from slavery by some years, but that does not change what's in our Constitution. This is supposed to be the living document that dictates how we are treated as human beings within the state of California and for our federal Constitution as a nation. And so really want to encourage our members to get behind this. I also want to point out one other thing, I want to share this. For ACA 3, there's a young man, younger than me, I'll put it that way, that's currently in Lancaster prison by the name of Samuel Brown. He helped write this. And so this is a movement that was reignited by Samuel Brown. Others in the past had pushed to make this happen, but this was literally a piece of legislation that was written by somebody who's currently incarcerated and serving a life sentence. So I wanted to share that with our audience to fully understand when we look at ACA 3 and eliminating involuntary servitude, it changes an entire dynamic for not just African-American people, but for everyone that's currently incarcerated and anyone that will be arrested in the future. I also want to go back a little bit and ask Esteban in terms of, and Miguel, matter of fact, in terms of the labeling of people as, and quote unquote, violent offenders. That language, how do we work to change that, and how does that impact the narrative of people that are coming home from incarceration?
You want to go ahead and answer that, Esteban, or you could go?
Go ahead, Miguel. Go ahead, and I'll follow you.
I think we changed that with our actions. I think as individuals, we have to change that in improving that, because I think that any opportunity that folks get to describe something bad from someone that is in these situations, they're gonna go ahead and take it. It's a process of that, but also of understanding where these individuals have been in, with the trauma they've experienced, and what are we trying to get to at the end point? Are we trying to heal them, or are we trying to break them? So it's about the ideal path of like healing or breaking them. And I think for us to get out of these words, we need to be thinking of healing rather than punishment and breaking the person down.
And I'll just jump in a little bit, and then I'll push it to Ronnie, or I'd like Ronnie to speak a little bit on it. But we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard, right? And we have to lead by example. And it's really just about not taking ownership of the decisions we made in the past, of our current circumstances, and being authentic and moving and operating in every space of our lives with authenticity. Because I know, for myself, and I only speak for myself. When I first came home, I carried a lot of shame around being incarcerated. I had considered even changing my name. But when I leaned into it, I saw that, when I leaned into it, one, I had a lot of tough conversations with people who, were very resistant to criminal justice reform. But I changed a lot of people's hearts and minds and perspectives on it. And it showed me that, it's very similar to any other issue that's stigmatized, like mental health, right? Like if we shy away from these conversations, then we're reinforcing the stigmas. But if we show and prove to these individuals that we are human beings and that we do act with integrity and decency, and that we aren't a reflection of a decision that we made when we were young, then I think that's how we change the narrative, right? But it's having those tough conversations. It's taking ownership of who we are as individuals and the mistakes and decisions that we've made, and being authentic.
Ronnie?
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Esteban. I think for me, in my personal experience, like being perceived, well, I was a violent offender, but the perception around me was that I was like this cold and calculated monster, right? And then you had like the staff culture and the stigma that believed that, we weren't worthy as juveniles because we're facing these lengthy sentences. And, it became for lack of a better word, they were prepping us for prison. So the culture and like the whole environment that permeated a juvenile hall for me was a place of like, wondering who I was, but also questioning my self-worth because everybody around me was telling me that I didn't matter. And, it was important for me to shift that alongside my therapist because it was disheartening to see grown men and women completely tell us that, we're less than human, treating us like dogs. And I guess the trauma within itself that it created for us was hard to bear. But, as my time progressed, I feel that alongside my therapist and my peers, we were able to shift that perception and humanize ourselves. And that to me is the most important aspect of the work that we do, is putting faces to the statistics, and it's humanizing the people who actually go through these hardships.
Thank you, Ronnie. Miguel, could you speak to 1391?
Yes, and just even that, I think, exemplifies the perception of violent individuals as a young teen that was looking to be tried as adult. I was looked at as a person that was not going to be rehabilitated. 1391 and yesterday's unanimous decision by the Supreme Court, should reaffirms that young people who do commit, some violent crimes are not that forever. It recognizes them as being able to be rehabilitated, and as someone that had committed a violent crime and that was given a second chance, I can't. I'm very fortunate, and I'm very very happy with the decision made by the Supreme Court yesterday on reaffirming that SB 1391 is constitutional, because a young person shouldn't be labeled for 30 or 40 years or for life as something they did when they were a child. And so I think that reaffirms the need, and I think our membership, again, I think Esteban described that a little bit earlier, is like we had to show that authenticity of being more than what they described as that label. And so yeah.
Thank you, Miguel. And there's something else that in the coming months and years that we will, as an organization, begin to dig into. And this is something that Martin Luther King was on his way to working on. Poverty is the root cause of most crime. poverty. If we think about it, the system or the symptoms of crime come from, what is the root cause? Under-resourced, underserved communities that are primarily Black and brown because of the historic systemic racism within our country. Redlining, discrimination, all of these things play a direct role in crime. If you take a person, imagine this. My grandson asked me a few months ago, he said, Grandpa, well, he called me Papa because he said I'm too cool to be a grandpa. He said, could you explain to me why people don't like us or why people don't want to treat us fairly? And why people say that we're not treated fairly? Because he said, like, I have good shoes, I have good clothes. And I said, well, imagine this. I said, you like to play Monopoly, right? And we always play Monopoly. And he said, yeah. I said, now imagine if Papa said, here's the new rule. You have to go around 3 times before you can buy any property. But Papa can go around and buy property as soon as he starts. Would that be fair? And he sat there for a minute. He said, that'd be cheating. And I was like, but it's a rule that Papa is giving you. He's like, it would still be cheating. And I said, why? He said, because it's not fair. Now imagine an entire race of people on a Monopoly board. And before you can do anything, you have to wait for everybody else to go around 3 times before you get a chance. That's what our system was based on. If you want to like just break it down into really simplistic terms, from redlining to even the New Deal. If we go back historically, these are things that we have to change. And we begin changing it by changing our Constitution, a living document that guides this nation and all of the states. 1391 is a good example of it. The majority of kids that go into our system are Black and brown. I've mentored over 700 kids that were in Barry J. Nightoff. I've only had 2 kids that were white. Ask yourself, why is that? Like literally, and I still keep in contact with them. I know their first and last names. But my point is that poverty is at the root of crime when we look at it. And that's something that in the coming years, like trying to figure out ways to make sure that people have more equity in areas of living wages and employment. And that's something that we do as an organization and overall. I want to give each one of our amazing guests on this show, our amazing policy team that I've been wanting to highlight for the work that they've been doing for some time now, an opportunity for closing thoughts. So first, thank you for joining us. Thank you for the hard work that you're putting in on the state and local level. We will also be highlighting our national work that will be coming up soon. So stay ready for us to be able to share with you. And so Esteban, could you give us some closing thoughts for our audience, please?
Yeah, I just really appreciate everybody joining. If any of these policy priorities interest you, please reach out to the team. We are always looking to bring those closest to the issues and those who have been impacted or could have been impacted by legislation into advocacy work. So please reach out to us. It's imperative like that we act as representatives of you all. But if there's a way to get more people involved, we want to definitely get you all involved. So yeah, I definitely appreciate it. And I'm glad to introduce you all to the team. Of course, happy to be back at ARC and really looking forward to getting all these across the finish line.
Right. Thank you, Esteban. And just want to, again, shout out this team and the amazing work that you're doing. Celina, closing thoughts for our audience?
Yeah, I think none of the work that we do would be possible without culture change. So activism, organizing, art, storytelling, all of that plays a vital role in policy change. So, even if you don't want to get involved in a sort of policy way, there's so many other ways to impact these issues. So if you are a social media influencer, or you are an organizer or an artist or a landlord, or a business owner, whatever it is that you do, if you integrate these issues and these ideas into your work and into the way that you carry yourself in the world, it actually makes a huge difference. Legislators do notice, they do care about what their constituents want and what they think. So keep being loud in every area. We really need you.
Thank you, Celina. I want to echo that for all of our members. Omar, I see you. Shonika, I see you. Like, hit up all of our members. Connect. We want to continue. This is our new ledge cycle. You see any of these policies that we're pushing that you want to get involved with through storytelling or anything else, you know the drill. Reach out. Let's make this happen. Josh, want to share your closing thoughts with our audience?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So this is just a small amount of our policy team. Our policy team consists of all of our members who come to training, who come to legislative meetings, who have come pass all these bills to bring people home. It wouldn't be possible without personal stories and people coming home and doing positive things, like being in the union, like going back to school and reuniting with families. So every small thing really matters to help change these policies, so that that it's not just the people sort of on the screen you see right now. It's all of our members who are coming home and engaging with policy and also doing great work once they come home.
Thank you, Josh. Greatly appreciate you. Miguel, want to give your closing thoughts to our audience?
Yeah, just really appreciative of the opportunity to share what ARC is doing. Again, this work is not just what Josh mentioned. It's not just the minds that are brought on here that came up with the ideas, but it's what our membership, what a lot of folks that are currently still going through inside these institutions that really drives us to make change. And like Esteban mentioned, have all these proposals meet the finish line, because the work doesn't stop here, and it won't stop even after this year. We still want to see our folks come home. We want to give them the opportunity to succeed, and we want to prevent them from entering these situations. So very grateful for ARC as a member and now as an employee for one of them for 2 years already. So thank you.
We're grateful to have you, Miguel. Just so you know that, I've told you that in private, and I'm saying it now for the whole world to hear, bro. Thank you. Ronnie, you want to share your closing thoughts with our audience?
Yes, thank you, Sam. Just like super grateful and like very humbled to be here. Just want to put it out there, if anybody wants to get more involved in LA County around juvenile justice reform, don't hesitate to reach out. We have a group of amazing interns that I work alongside, and we're doing this work every day. But I also want to thank the policy team for all the work that we do. We show up even when we don't want to sometimes, because someone has to do this work. And lastly, I want to give a quick shout out to my buddy Varden Fan in the audience. He just came home, so I want to congratulate him as well.
Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate you. Ronnie, my closing thoughts for our audience. So this work that we do is meant to give voices to those who have been most marginalized, those that are currently in systems. And want to point out 77% of our staff are systems impacted, 75% of our staff are formerly incarcerated. 100% of our membership is formerly incarcerated. This is a member-driven organization, and the voice of people that are formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated drive the programs and the legislation that we push. So literally, that's where it comes from. It doesn't come from anyone that does not come from that population. I think it's important for us to understand how important it is in our country, in our state, to create a more equitable system for everyone. That's the key. That's how we make a better country for everyone, to make a system that's actually fair for everyone. And speaking of being fair for everyone, so we're closing out Black History Month this weekend. And next month is the month for Women's History Month. And so be prepared. We're going to be highlighting some incredible stories in a series around women and women's empowerment and everything that's going on with our ARC women. Celina will be in some of these shows, and others that are part of the ARC organization are allies. We want to uplift our sisters and let them know that we always stand with them, beside them, and their leadership. So look forward to seeing you all next month. Until then, take care, God bless, and stay safe.